me ask you a question. Is it true that God will never allow us to suffer through more than we can handle? Hello, I'm Chris, and this is Faith Elements, and I'd like to welcome you. A friend of mine recently asked me an interesting question. He said that he had always understood that God would never allow us to suffer more than we could handle. He was dealing with a lot of stuff in his life, and he said it was getting to the point that he just felt like he couldn't handle it. You know, the first thing we need to understand of this saying is that it really has no solid biblical basis. There simply is no passage in the Bible that says this exact phrase or carries the intent of saying that our life load will never be pushed to extremes. To take a look at this from a purely theological perspective, we have to make room for what is called the free will doctrine. In a nutshell, the doctrine of free will establishes that all human beings are free to decide whether or not to follow God or to do His will in our own lives. When you keep that in consideration and pair it up with the idea that most of the load in our lives is caused by our own actions or the actions of those around us, we can see how God is not going to force things to go our way all the time. It just doesn't allow for our free will to play out. We could spend a lot of time discussing that one, but as you can see by the play bar down at the bottom, we need to move on from this doctrinal aspect of free will. But please, let's continue this portion of the discussion in the comments section down below. Moving on, we have to think about what it means to handle something. If you think of this in terms of capacity, think of what it means for something is to be pushed beyond its capacity. If a bridge is loaded with more weight than it can carry, it will collapse. If you stack a boat with too much cargo, it'll sink. If you load a horse with too much gear, it will have trouble walking and will wear out quickly. So when it comes to the load of life, what does it mean to be able to handle it? And where do we get this concept that God will allow no more than we can handle? Philippians 4:13 says, I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. This passage does not mean that God gives us the strength to do things we want, but can endure what is thrown at us. This was written when Paul was in jail. His freedom had been taken from him. He was experiencing beatings for his faith. Many of us in those same circumstances would feel that we were dealing with more than we could handle. But in that time, Paul inspired many in his generation and millions in successive generations, including our own. His circumstances were not in control of him. Rather, his circumstances inspired him to inspire young congregations in the formative years of the early church. The strength mentioned in Philippians is not ours. It is the strength of Jesus in us. It is not making a decision based on our will, but making a decision to seek out God's will in those negative circumstances. Like Paul, those times when we perceive that we are caught up in some serious nonsense may actually prove to be just what we needed to go through to show us a path toward faithful success. How we define that success can be found not in the means we determine. That measure of success is found in the Christ who is the strength behind us. Brokenness in the midst of negative circumstances can be defined by when our actions take us away from God's will. If the resulting action is sinful, then we have truly allowed for defeat. If through the storm we find strength to persevere and stay on the course laid out for us by God, then success is ours. Something to pray about, don't you think?